We're going to be starting the book of Matthew today. We're not going to cover every chapter, every verse. Much like Isaiah, it's going to be kind of a bird's eye view. We will focus in on some things. Like today, we're covering the entire Matthew 1 and 2. Next week, Matthew 3 and 4. The week after that, the entire Sermon on the Mount. So we're going to be able to focus in on a few things as we do that, but we're not going to be able to go in depth to every single point that Matthew draws out in his account of the gospel. So today we're talking about the birth of Jesus, Matthew chapters 1 and 2. Before we begin, do you know who Matthew's primary audience was? The Jews. We have 4 accounts of the gospel. Why do we need 4 accounts of the gospel? Because people were in different mindsets. The Jews, they didn't need a different message, but they needed a different approach to the message. It's the same message for everyone, but the approach is a little bit different. Matthew focused on the Jewish mindset. Mark focused on the Roman mindset. Luke, the Greek mindset. John was completely different. He kind of focused on everything, and his focus was to prove that Jesus Christ is the Son of God through the account that he related. And that's the point of all of the gospel accounts. They don't contradict one another. Some of them are not in chronological order. They relate different events, different points of view to those events, but they're not contradictory points of view. So let's keep that in mind as we go through this. You may read something in Matthew's gospel that, I thought Luke said it this way, and he might have. But they were approaching it from different perspectives, different viewpoints.
Luke brought out more detail.
Yes, Luke had a lot more detail, which goes back to his profession. He was a physician, and so he paid a lot of attention to detail, especially in some of the medical things and the healings. He was able to pinpoint exactly what was wrong with somebody, whereas Matthew might use more of the common language. Again, not contradictory, but different perspectives. All right, so let's go through our reading review. We're not going to be able to read the entire text like we did with Isaiah because there's a lot more text here. So please make sure that you read it ahead of class and have your answers prepared. So number 1, we have fill in the blank. From verse 17 of chapter 1. So all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations. From David until the captivity in Babylon are 14 generations. And from the captivity in Babylon until the Christ are 14 generations. All right, number 2. Why did Joseph want to put Mary away secretly? He was a just man. He didn't want to make her a public example. All right. Number 3. Why was Joseph told to name the son Jesus? He will save his people from their sins. The name Jesus means salvation. It's the same as Joshua of the Old Testament. The words are the same. So when you look at the transliteration of Jesus, you see that it's Yeshua, Y-E-S-H-U-A, and that translates to Joshua in the Old Testament. All right, number 4, how is the word Immanuel translated? God with us. All right, number 5, where and when was Jesus born? Bethlehem of Judea in the days of King Herod. All right. Number 6. What was Herod's reaction to hearing of the King of the Jews from the wise men? He was troubled. There's another king? You mean I'm going to have to give up my throne? He was troubled. And I think it's interesting, Matthew also says the people were troubled. Maybe they anticipated a civil war of sorts, and they didn't want to go through that. But he was troubled. That was the reaction of Herod. Number 7, when did the angel of the Lord tell Joseph to flee with where did the angel of the Lord tell Joseph to flee with the young child and his mother? Egypt. Number 8, what did Herod do when he determined the wise men were not returning to him?
He was angry. He sent forth and to put death to all the male children who were in Bethlehem and all its districts from 2 years according to the time, from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had determined from the wise.
Yeah. They said they saw the star at this time, and it's now 2 years later. He's going to put to death all those male children to protect his throne, to protect his reign. And he doesn't just focus on Bethlehem itself, but all the districts of Bethlehem as well, in case they're in the suburbs, in case he's in Pace instead of Pensacola, right? So the whole area there around Bethlehem because of his anger. All right, number 9. When did the angel of the Lord tell Joseph to return to Israel? After the death of Herod. And then number 10, when it was discovered Herod's son was reigning, Joseph was again warned. Where did he dwell? Nazareth. In the city of Nazareth in the region of Galilee. Okay. All right. Now, you've got the review questions. You've got the discussion questions. Anything that was not in these two sides of the paper that you want to bring out? All right. Let's look at question number 1 on our discussion side then. Why did Matthew begin his inspired account of Jesus' genealogy with Abraham?
I am to show Jesus was the seed of promise to Abraham. He was also the legal son and heir through Isaac, who was the son of a freeborn, not a slave.
Right.
And showed that he literally descended from Abraham through Mary and her ancestors.
He was a direct descendant, a literal descendant through Abraham, through Mary. The seed promise, all of that goes into this answer, right? Again, who did Matthew write to? Who was his primary audience? The Jewish mind. They're expecting the Messiah. They're expecting this Messiah to be a fulfillment of that promise that God made to Abraham. A large part of that proof of who Jesus is. He's the Messiah. He's the King of the Jews. He's the fulfillment of prophecy. Matthew wanted to show beyond the shadow of a doubt that Jesus was this promised Messiah. And a large part of that rested on the proof of his connection with Abraham. That's right. Genesis chapter 12. The Lord said to Abram, get out of your country, from your family, from your father's house to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse him who curses you. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Jesus is identified here in the very first verse of Matthew's gospel is the son of David, the son of Abraham. Two of the most important, if not the most important individuals in the Jewish mind. David and Abraham. Abraham was the father of the Jewish race. Everything to the Jew began and ended with Abraham. Matthew sees the source of the Jewish race in Abraham and begins to trace the line of descent from him. If one's not a descendant of Abraham, he is not to be dealt with as an heir of the rich blessings of Jehovah, according to the Jewish attitudes. God made that covenant with Abraham, and it was through Jesus that this promise of all families being blessed, that would be fulfilled. Now, how is Matthew's genealogy different from Luke's? There's some different names, isn't there? I think this one is from Mary. Luke is from Joseph, I believe. There's one shows the legal right to the throne. The other shows the blood right to the throne. Luke goes all the way back to God. He starts with God, or goes back to God, I guess. He starts with Jesus and goes backwards. And so God created Adam, and then Adam had Seth, and then, he goes all the way back to creation. Whereas Matthew just picks up with the beginning of the Jewish race. Because, again, that's his audience. They wanted proof that he was Abraham's seed. Okay? All right, any other comments, questions on number 1? All right, number 2. What names and phrases stand out to you in the genealogy of Jesus as recorded in Matthew 1 through 16? Rahab. Why? What stands out there?
Well, I think it's interesting because her role that she played.
Okay.
And what she was.
Yeah. Yeah, she was a prostitute.
But yet it was important that she's mentioned.
Yeah. She was a prostitute. She was not an Israelite. And she played an instrumental role to the Israelites' success by hiding those spies. Yeah. All right. Who else?
Well, similar to question 1, it starts off saying he's the son of David, son of Abraham. But the genealogy clearly shows Mary descended from David, so Jesus also came from David.
Right.
All back to David.
Yeah. And there's 14 generations, right? Abraham to David is 14. David to the Babylonian captivity is 14. Captivity to Jesus is 14. Okay. Who else? Yes.
Verse 16 talks about Messiah.
Yes.
That's one of the first accounts to talk about that.
Right.
And referring to the husband, again about Jim, how it's coming down. He's the husband of Mary.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Verse 16, to go back to the point that Mary brought up, Jacob begot Joseph. Okay, this one is Joseph's line. You were correct. This one's Joseph's line. The other is Mary's. So Jacob begot Joseph, who was the husband of Mary. It doesn't say Joseph begot Jesus, does it? That's interesting, isn't it? God recognizes, Matthew recognizes that Jesus is not blood relation to Joseph, but there's still the legal aspect that gives him the right to that throne. Yeah.
And also, several of his descendants in the role in the country, that they all ended up at some point in Egypt.
Yeah.
Including later Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a connection with Egypt.
With Abraham,
Mm-hmm.
Joseph, and these are a role too, just where they all ended up at one point silent to because of what God told them.
Yeah. Egypt plays a major role in the Old Testament. I think more than we really recognize. After Moses, there's still just a major role there throughout throughout the Old Testament. There's prophecies against Egypt in some of the prophetic works. All right, so here's anybody else?
I had,
Yeah.
the title Christ. Matthew's example of Jesus' title, Christ, from the beginning, which is the Greek translation of the Hebrew title, Messiah.
Yeah.
And also, the number 14, the genealogy is structured into three states, I guess, 14 generation, which is a symbolic number.
Okay.
And then I got women. The women, the genealogy includes the name of 4 women. They are Rahab, Ruth, of Uriah. 3 women are examples of God's grace and how they keep the I can't read them right, but the new name of Judah and his brother, and then Mark, Jacob, and Joseph, God will add, take away and Mary is the beloved wish for a child.
Okay. All right.
I should also say Ruth is another name mentioned, and again, she's
Yeah.
not a Jew.
Right. She's a Moabitess. That's right. God was able to use people despite who they were, how society viewed them, despite their past, the sins that they may have committed. Rahab was a prostitute. Ruth was not an Israelite. She was a Moabitess. Tamar sinned. And we see these sins in the lives of some of these individuals. God was still able to use them to bring about his will. I started with Abraham. He was the father of the Jews. You had the other patriarchs, Isaac and Jacob and Judah, that were mentioned there. Again, the audience of the Jews, it was important to include these names. But it was kind of strange to see the names of women because of the Jewish mindset. No Jew would have thought to have included women in the genealogy. It was just against their culture, against their mindset. But we have Tamar, we have Rahab, we have Ruth, and Bathsheba, though she is not named, we know who Matthew's talking about, the wife of Uriah. You may recall the scandalous incident in which Tamar tricked her father-in-law Judah to commit fornication, Genesis chapter 38. Rahab, the former harlot or prostitute in Jericho, hid the spies, and she was saved when Jericho was destroyed. Ruth, also in verse 5, was a Moabitess. She married the son of the prostitute Rahab and became the great-grandmother of King David. The fourth woman mentioned in verse 6, though not by name, Bathsheba. We read about her in 2 Samuel chapters 11 and 12. Matthew does not try to defend David's actions, but plainly states that he had a child by another man's wife. So many of these personalities in the lineage of Messiah were marred by sin. Here in the very genealogy of Jesus, we see the need for salvation, and that's exactly what Jesus brought. Yes?
I think that's why it's listed like the life, to remind them, hey, David,
Yeah?
we all know, and he was supposed to be right on the same that he did.
Yeah.
So I think it's done on purpose, listed for the life.
Absolutely. Yeah, he was a man after God's own heart. He wasn't perfect. He wasn't perfect. And we're not going to be perfect either. That's right.
Weren't there some kings in here that were not?
Yes. Yeah. Manasseh was a wicked king. And we had Josiah. He was a good king. Yeah?
I was going to say David always recognized his sin.
Yeah.
Sometimes he had to be told.
He had to be prompted some, yeah.
He always repented of it.
Yeah, he did. He regretted what he did, and he repented of it. David mentioned the wicked kings such as Manasseh, righteous kings such as Josiah. Josiah was one of the greatest kings that came out of the divided kingdom era. He urged the people to reform, to come back to the life that God wanted them to live. He lived a very short time, but he did accomplish good, righteous things during his life. Now, I also looked at some of the omissions. Because when you go back and you look, there are at least 3 names that are left out. Several kings of Judah are mentioned, but between Joram and Ahaziah, Joash, and Amaziah also reigned. There's no reason given for the omission of these names. Some think it was done to preserve that symmetry of bringing the names in each list to 14. That's mentioned in verse 17. These names may have been selected for omission because they were immediate descendants of Ahab and Jezebel. Such omissions were common in giving long lists in genealogical tables.
Are they good or bad?
I believe that they were not good. I don't remember for sure. But I think, being descendants of Ahab and Jezebel, most likely were not. Yeah, there weren't very many. I know in the southern kingdom, I know we had Josiah. He's the one that kind of stands head and shoulders above the rest. Hezekiah had his faults, but generally is seen as a good king. There were not very many that had that distinction. That did right in the sight of God, that followed after the steps of their father David. Yeah. There's a lot of spiritual golden nuggets that can be found in these genealogical tables. Verse 11 mentions this man Jeconiah or Coniah. This name in this genealogy gives us a strong defense against the false doctrine of premillennialism. When we go back to Jeremiah chapter 22, verses 28 through 30, Jeremiah says, "Is this man Coniah a despised, broken idol, a vessel in which is no pleasure? Why are they cast out, he and his descendants, and cast into a land which they do not know? O earth, 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 hear the word of the Lord. Thus says the Lord, write this man down as childless, a man who shall not prosper in his days. For none of his descendants shall prosper sitting on the throne of David and ruling anymore in Judah." Old-time preacher Foy Wallace Jr. explains the significance of this prophecy as it relates to Jesus and his genealogy. Brother Wallace said, Jeconiah, the prophet, said, "No man of his seed should prosper sitting on David's throne and ruling anymore in Judah." What does that have to do with the question of Christ sitting on David's throne? Just this: Jesus Christ was of the fleshly seed of Coniah. When the Lord said, "Write this man childless," it does not mean that Coniah was congenitally childless. The names of his sons are given in the Old Testament record, as well as in New Testament genealogies. Coniah had sons. He was not childless physically. But the Lord said, "Write this man childless." That meant that he should not have a successor on David's throne. Coniah would be the last man to occupy the fleshly throne of David. Zedekiah, the son of Coniah, who was appointed to the throne by Nebuchadnezzar, was nothing more than a vassal of the king of Babylon. Young Zedekiah was the prince and representative of Nebuchadnezzar, but he did not succeed to the throne of David. With Coniah, David's earthly throne became extinct, blotted out forever. Now, since Christ was of the seed of Coniah, and no man of his seed can sit on David's throne and rule anymore in Judah, it follows that Jesus Christ cannot occupy the throne of David on earth. The prophets said that Jesus Christ, the Son of David, should occupy David's throne. Since it can't be done on earth, it follows that Jesus Christ would occupy David's throne, not on earth, but in heaven. And that is exactly what Peter affirms in Acts chapter 2 and verse 30. There's a lot of other interesting names on this list. Zerubbabel is one of those who led the Jews back from captivity with Nehemiah and Ezra during the time the worship was reestablished, the law was reinstituted, and the temple and the wall of the city was rebuilt. Zerubbabel was one of the instrumental individuals involved in those things, and there are many others of whom we know very little because they lived during that period of silence that we have no inspired record of, the intertestamental period. All right. Anybody else have anything on the genealogy?
Question.
Yes.
You kept saying Coniah.
Yes.
What happened to the J and E?
Differences between the Hebrew and the Greek language, I'm assuming. Some of the other names, especially in the King James Version, if you look, Judah is Judas. Just different spellings depending on the language. Yeah. All right. Any others? All right. Number 3. What lessons can be learned from the wise men from the East?
Seek God with diligence
Seek God with diligence and
and determination.
determination. I like that. What else?
I believe the wise men knew Herod's ulterior motive. He wouldn't lie. He would set out to exterminate any threat to his throne.
Yeah.
And with they kept calling Jesus the King of the Jews, which he was thinking earthly, so he was out to get him. But today, the wise men weren't going to go against God's will.
Mm-hmm.
The angels sent them to Jesus at the time. And if you remember, it was 2 years later, so Jesus wasn't in the manger. He was in a house. Mary and Joseph's house. But today, if we decide we're going to do something against God's will, then we are willing to sin. And that's wrong.
Yeah, we've got to abide by His will. We've got to do what God says the way He says to do it.
It doesn't matter who tells us to do it.
Right.
Even the president or the governor or whatever, but if it's against God's will, we should not do it.
Right. Yeah. Shirley?
Well, the gifts that they brought were not random.
Yeah.
They had meaning to them in particular about what Christ's life was going to be and what his sacrifice was going to be. His soul is deity, frankincense is an offering to God, and myrrh is Jesus' death and embalming the bodies that they used. So they did have meaning. They were not just random things that they picked up and brought.
Yeah. Yes, the significance of the gifts. Yeah. They didn't just stop and get a gift card.
Now,
Yeah. There was meaning. We say that it's the thought that counts. They put thought into the gifts. Definitely.
well, they also understood who he was
Yeah.
by the choosing of the gifts that they brought.
Yeah, the Septuagint was available widely at this time. It was the Greek translation of the Old Testament. They had access to that. They had read it. They had understood it. And so they recognized who he was and the significance of who he was. The Truth for Today commentary on this passage is very good. In the application section, I think it's Brother David Stewart. It gives us several lessons that we can learn. Number one, their search was not convenient. Regardless of whether the wise men came from Arabia, Babylonia, or Persia, their trip was a long one. They would likely have traveled around the Fertile Crescent on their way to Jerusalem. They sacrificed time, they sacrificed money and energy in their search for Christ. Those who are seeking Jesus today will discover that discipleship demands no less. We have to make some sacrifices. We may have to sacrifice jobs. We may have to sacrifice relationships. We may have to sacrifice something that we hold dear because we hold it dear, because we put it above God. And so we have to sacrifice those things. The second lesson, their search required humility. When the wise men arrived in Jerusalem, they asked the people where the newborn king was residing. Those seeking Jesus today must also have a humble heart and ask questions of those who possess more knowledge. Think about the Ethiopian eunuch in Acts chapter 8. Philip came up to him and said, "Do you understand what you read?" "How can I unless somebody explains it to me?" You know, we can read the Bible. We've got the completed New Testament. We can learn what the truth is. But many times we can be misled by people who have a misunderstanding of the Bible. So we need to be diligent in searching and understand we may not have all the answers, and the person we're talking to may not have all the answers either. And we need to compare everything that we're being told to what the Scriptures say. When you're driving somewhere and you get lost, the days before GPS, I guess, you had to stop and ask for directions, right? No man wants to do that. But sometimes you have to ask for direction. And God's GPS is better than any GPS man ever made. So we need to stop and ask Him for directions. Their search created a stir. The question asked by the wise men upset Herod. He felt threatened by a contender to his throne. It upset the people who wanted to maintain the status quo. Similarly, today, when one searches for Jesus, it sometimes upsets others who are content in their lifestyles. Light has a tendency to expose darkness. Darkness doesn't like to be exposed, does it? Their search relied upon the Scriptures. In order to answer the wise men's question, Herod consulted the Jewish leaders. They knew from the Scriptures that the Christ would be born in Bethlehem. Micah chapter 5, verse 2. Those who want to follow Christ today must consult the Scriptures as they bear witness to Him. Another lesson, their search resulted in great joy. As the wise men were leaving Jerusalem for Bethlehem, the star that they had previously seen in the east reappeared. This was cause for great joy as they knew that they were nearing the place where the child was staying. When one searching for Jesus becomes a child of God in the waters of baptism, it is indeed a time of rejoicing. Again, the Ethiopian eunuch. When he came up out of those waters, Philip was taken away, but he went on his way rejoicing. Despite adversities of life, Christians are called to rejoice continually in the Lord. And their search ended in worship of the King. When the wise men entered the house of Bethlehem, their first instinct was to fall to the ground and worship Jesus. They offered Him those rich gifts, the gold, the frankincense, the myrrh. Those who finally find Jesus today will spend the rest of their lives praising Christ for who He is and all He has done. Any other thoughts on the wise men? David.
It was, as you are pointing out, a period of time, a quiet period of time, because they arrived at a house.
Yes.
Second thing is I find interesting is that Jesus was identified as the Messiah. Where is the one who's been born King of the Jews? And then I'm sure different. I haven't checked different said, he's worried about losing kingship, but there's a fracturing. There's also a fracturing coming of at least of the Jews.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to lose control of these Jews of the world.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a loss of control. And when we have any kind of power, we don't want to give it up, do we? That's just kind of how humans are. We don't want to lose that power once we get a taste of it. And so it's hard for him to accept that. All right? Anything else there? All right, number 4. What lessons can we learn from Joseph in these 2 chapters?
I wrote down integrity, honesty, solid work ethic.
Integrity, honesty, and a solid work ethic. Okay? Integrity is the first word in my answer as well. That's a great word. I love that word. What else you got?
He was a just man. He wanted to do right by Mary, even under circumstances he didn't really understand at the time. He was obedient and faithful to God's word. Joseph obeyed God's word on many occasions. He married Mary. He also fled to Egypt based on God's word. He returned out of Egypt into the land of Galilee on God's word.
Yeah.
That reminds me of Abraham. God kept moving him around.
Right. Yeah. Shirley?
I was going to say, definitely correlation between him and Elizabeth when she was pregnant. John, that she was going to have John. The difference between the husband's reaction. Because God said, okay, well, okay, you don't believe me, then you're going to be used.
Yeah.
But Joseph didn't have that hesitation in that regard. He believed. He may have not understood.
Right.
He didn't. Mary didn't understand. And it took her forever to understand.
Yeah.
And the mother carried him and saw these things and didn't really understand. But I think there's a huge difference between him and then John and Elizabeth and the 2 dads.
Yeah.
How they responded.
That's very interesting. I hadn't thought about that. You read about John the Baptist and his birth in the Gospel according to Luke. Zacharias, nah, that can't happen. Nah. But it did. And the lack of belief,
But also goes back to
the doubt.
Abraham and Sarah.
Yeah, Abraham and Sarah.
Sarah laughed.
Right?
And then they didn't believe because of the age. And it's the same way here because of age.
Right.
It's like, well, I'll show you.
Yeah.
Don't laugh at me. I'll show. And then not tell the truth, but you laugh. But so, and then it's the same way with him. He's
Yeah.
like, okay, well, he'll be mute.
Yeah, that's an interesting contrast between Zacharias and Joseph there. Yeah. Going back to the integrity that Thomas mentioned, we see this in the example of Joseph. He's called a just man, but he was not vindictive. When Mary was told she would conceive, she went with haste to her cousin Elizabeth in the Gospel according to Luke. She stayed with Zacharias and Elizabeth for 3 months. She comes back home 3 months later, and she tells Joseph that she's pregnant. Maybe she told him about Gabriel's visit. Maybe she just told him that she was pregnant without explaining it. I don't know, after 3 months, probably not showing very much if she is at this point. Maybe she's experiencing some morning sickness. What went through Joseph's mind? Would he have suspected that something happened while she was gone for those 3 months? That's the only way for a woman to get pregnant, right? Even if she had told him about the angel, to the average mind, that's a far-fetched tale. Even though in this case it turned out to be true. He considers putting her away, but doing it privately, doing it secretly. His intentions are noble. He doesn't want to make a public example of her. He doesn't want to shame her. He doesn't want to take revenge on her. possibly even leading to her death under the law of Moses. Yeah.
He's also the one who's told what to name him.
Yeah.
Just as it wasn't Elizabeth told, the dads were told what to name Jesus and John.
Right.
So I think that is significant that they were the ones to be told what their name was to be.
Yeah. And Zacharias had to write it on a tablet for others to see it. Yeah. Yes.
An angel of the Lord came to Joseph in the dream.
Yes.
Told him that it was okay that she married Mary.
That's right.
And so, I don't know what time frame that happened, whether before Mary come home or after, but that's the reason we went on.
Yeah. Well, I think that we see that, again, chronology may be a little bit off. Verse 19 talks about him not wanting to make her a public example. And so he's going to put her away privately. Then, verse 20, the angel came to him. So I think he knew before the angel came that she was pregnant. Yeah. So there was that time period. How long that time period was? It may have been the same day. Don't really know. But there was that he knew before God told him. Yeah. 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 He was corroborating that statement. Absolutely. So in addition to the integrity of Joseph, we also see his submission to God. God tells him to do something and he does it. We observe this in the concern for his family as well, as has already been brought up. He sought to protect Mary and Jesus at every turn. The flight into Egypt until the death of Herod, the decision to go to Nazareth when he learned of the reign of Herod's son, he did what any father would do. That is that he saw that his family was taken care of and protected. All right, we're out of time, but last question. To what Old Testament scriptures does Matthew refer here?
Isaiah 7:14, born of a virgin and called his name Immanuel. Micah 5:2 talked about Bethlehem. It said king coming out of that, and it referred to Jesus. And I had Jeremiah 31:15.
Yeah, that was from Matthew 2:17 and 18. Okay. Anybody have any others?
I don't think we had Micah and correlate with Matthew 2:5-6 on Bethlehem, and then it was still Isaiah.
Yeah. We also have Hosea, chapter 11, verse 1. When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. Matthew refers to that, Matthew 2:14 and 15. The one that was a little bit confusing for some may have been the very last verse of Matthew 2, where it says there, page turned, it says, they dwelt in a city called Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophets, he shall be called a Nazarene. We don't have a written prophecy that says that. Okay? The word Nazarene at that time conveyed the idea of someone worthless or despicable. It was the opinion of many that no worthwhile person could ever come from Nazareth. Think about what was it Nathaniel that said it in John chapter 1, can anything good come out of Nazareth? It was predicted by the prophets that Christ would be despised of the people, despised and esteemed not, a reproach of men, a root out of a dry ground. And that's what I've got, Psalm 22:6-8, and Isaiah 53:2-4 there. Being a Nazarene summed up these concepts of men. These prophecies were fulfilled in the fact that Christ grew up in Nazareth in Galilee. All right, any final thoughts or questions?
Just a quick one. The priest should have known that the Old Testament was the prophecy of Micah.
Yes.
They tied that together. They should have known where Jesus was going.
Yeah, they should have. Virgil?
Trying to
Integrity, upright character. Living as God wants you to live. Yep, yeah. All right, next week, Matthew 3 through 4. If you did not get a sheet, they are up here at the front. Thank you.